The EU Green Deal today supported by Bayer. We are asking what is the role for innovation and disruptive technologies in agriculture. Now, the Green Deal is central to the European Commission's plan to bounce back better and recover from the current pandemic. It also has to deliver on climate change goals, as well as that buzzword of this year, resilience. So we're going to talk about how new smart intellectual property moves may be able to facilitate that in the area of agriculture. Of course, as always, you can follow along on social media using the hashtag EA Debates. I'll do my best to keep an eye on what's being said there. And as well as that, we have this Q&A function, so feel free to ask questions of our speakers. It's open. I'm opening it now, and you can also send your questions through that, and I will do my best to put them to our expert speakers over the next hour and a quarter. We will have opening statements from each of the panelists before going into the debate. So let me introduce to you, we have Denis Dambois, policy expert from the IPR unit in DG GROW in the European Commission. We also have Jürgen Eckhart, Senior Vice President and Head of LEAPS by Bayer. Alan Strowell is a professor at UC Louvain and also an expert on IP. Johannes Kotschi from Open Source Seeds Agricole will be telling us about some innovative and forward-looking ideas. And Hele Piljama is a Director of Patent Law at the European Patent Office, the EPO. Thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time this morning for what I hope will be a lively discussion. Denis, let me start with you. Give us your opening statement and tell us a little bit from the Commission perspective what it is on this area. And I think you're muted because we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody.
Catchphrase of the
year. In any sector where our companies are facing challenges and competition from abroad, innovation is needed. That is not new. And this is clearly necessary also in the agricultural sector. There is a need then to provide suitable incentives to innovation. It can be about publicly funded research programs. It can also be about suitable regimes and tools for the protection of intellectual property. Intellectual property, IP policy is considered important, even crucial by industry, and certainly by the Commission. This is not new. And indeed, the Commission adopted last month a quite comprehensive and ambitious IP action plan, which includes 5 main pillars. I will not enter into the detail here. But this plan announces several actions which intend to promote not only the protection and enforcement of intellectual property, that is very traditional, nothing really new, but also it's in a balanced way, it tries to emphasize and to facilitate access to IP protected knowledge and technologies, etc. The typical example here is standard essential patents, but there are many other relevant issues. And also for agriculture, already now we have in IP laws a number of exceptions targeting these issues. Thus, to stop here, this blueprint, this IP action plan of the Commission, evidently will take the agricultural sector into account in its different actions, and certainly it is an important component supporting the implementation of the EU Green Deal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denis. Short and sweet there. Jürgen, let me turn to you and give us the perspective and explain perhaps what LEAPS by Bayer is actually as well.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I hope you can hear me. A pleasure to be here. And yeah, maybe I start with a short background on LEAPS by Bayer. So you of course all know Bayer, large German company in pharmaceuticals, consumer health, and crop science. I don't work in any of these divisions, but I work for a corporate function which is called LEAPS by Bayer. And what we do at LEAPS by Bayer is really, this is about open innovation. This is where we work with startup companies around the world who are, developing breakthrough technologies. And we collaborate with these startup companies by giving them capital. So we end up in a minority shareholding position. But we also sometimes contribute our IP and know-how to basically put all the ingredients together that are required to hopefully take that next inventive step and create one of a new breakthrough technology. So that's in a nutshell what we do at Leaps by Bayer. I'm personally not a plant scientist and also not a patent expert, so please keep that in mind. Good. So with that introduction, let me maybe start by saying that we at Bayer fully support the EU's objective of becoming the first climate neutral continent by 2050 and the goals put forward in the European Green Deal. We at Bayer actually have set ourselves ambitious targets too and want to be climate neutral by 2030. Our innovations at Bayer are designed to support, for instance, sustainable improvement in agriculture. And we believe that innovation is a key driver in moving towards a future-oriented economy based on decarbonization and digitalization. The European Commission has stressed the importance of the European bioeconomy in reaching the climate objectives by unlocking the full potential of this sector. Indeed, we see a new era in the field of biotechnology, the biorevolution, and exceptional opportunities to address societal challenges are currently opening up with tailor-made processes, including the possibility, for example, for targeted change of genomes. The revolutionary nature of this cutting-edge innovation has just been underpinned by the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, which was awarded in October this year to the inventors of the technology, namely Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, for their invention around the CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tool. Gene editing can be applied, for example, in the agricultural sector to provide for more robust plants under difficult climatic conditions. Thus, new plant breeding innovations such as genome editing can ultimately help mitigate climate change and also develop more resource efficient and sustainable food production models. It can also support the development of tailored plant-based resources as the foundation of a bio-based economy, hence contributing to the exact objective of the EU Green Deal. I want to give you an example of one of the companies that we are working with at Leaps by Bayer. So we are involved in a company called Join Bio. What Join Bio is trying to do is basically engineer microbes who can fixate nitrogen from the air for the benefit of the plant. And if the plant can fixate nitrogen from the air, then we dramatically reduce the need for fertilizer. And that's one of these biological revolutions that, for example, one of our portfolio companies, Join, is working on. And, you know, we have contributed, as I mentioned in my intro, not only our capital, but really also our know-how and our IP for Join to be successful. At Leaps, very particularly, we believe in growing knowledge through collaboration. By opening up the innovation process and incorporating external knowledge, the innovation potential can be increased significantly. However, in order to enable this collaboration, a clear legal framework for IP rights is necessary. IP rights are an important part of the innovation process, especially when this process comes with high investment, specialized research, and a significant risk of failure. Because only when IP is protected, there is an incentive to indeed share information with others. Thus, in addition to creating a workable regulatory environment for these innovative technologies, the full potential of the bioeconomy sector can only be unlocked by creating a solid IP framework. Both elements will be key in supporting the EU's climate objectives and fostering Europe's innovative capacity. I look forward to an interesting debate this morning. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. I see we already have some questions coming in right from the beginning, so that's great. I'll remind our audience that they can use that Q&A tool. Alain, let me turn to you now. Tell us a bit about the IP side. We've heard a lot there from Jürgen, but move the conversation onwards, I hope, with your points.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, I'm more specialized in the IP aspects relating to software, information technology, artificial intelligence. It doesn't look like it has a connection with the topic of today, but it has. Why? Because we have the digital transformation, which applies to all sectors, including agriculture. And we are talking today about smart farming, for instance. And that means basically the use of more data in order to improve the process. And that could go in the direction of the Green Deal, obviously, if by using smart farming, you can reduce, for instance, the amount of pesticides used, the excess of nutrients, and so on. So I think we have an important aspect there connected with innovation, and it is as well connected with different EU initiatives. I'll just mention one to start, the EU data strategy that was released in February this year. And you might know that one of the objectives of this data strategy is to create data spaces, including an agricultural data space. The objective of having those data space, in particular the Agri one, is to improve sustainability, performance, competitiveness, because you might have tailored application taking into account different types of data, not only production data on different fields and types of products. Health observation might be important. Meteorological data as well can help to improve the performance on many fields. And there are many other types of data, local data collected by the farmers, sometimes collected through the machinery that they buy from manufacturers. And we have then some possible problems about data sharing. Who should own all those data and make the best out of it? And that's where the new data space come in and to new governments about data sharing. I think we are going in the direction of a data-driven ecosystem, and as well in agriculture, we need to have an adjusted IP framework. And concerning data sharing, the IP plan that the Commission released on November 25th, and that Denis already mentioned, says that data sharing is increasing in importance, but, and I quote here, the implication of the IP framework for data sharing remains to be clarified. And we could discuss that, but the Commission has flagged two issues that might be clarified uh, concerning the IP framework. One is the 2016 Trade Secret Directive, which has harmonized the protection of trade secrets. And the second instrument is the Database Directive, which is an older instrument from 1996. Obviously, the protection of trade secrets and databases are important for the data sharing. We don't know yet in which direction the Commission will go, but the objective is probably to facilitate data sharing. And I think that would go in the right direction in order, for instance, to succeed with the Green Deal.
Thank you very much. Like you, I'm a little bit more experienced in the digital technology sector, but of course we know about Gaia X, that big data sharing area, and there is an agri element to that as well. And as a result, of course, I'm very used to talking about open source in terms of technology. But Johannes, you're going to tell us about open source in terms of seeds. So please, I look forward to hearing that. Give us a strong explanation. Thank you. We can't hear you, Johannes. I think you might still be on mute.
Can you hear me now?
We can indeed. Thank you for that.
Good. Thank you for the floor, Jennifer. Open source is a success story. It was developed in the sector of computers and software, as we all know, and introducing open source licenses stopped the process of market concentration for software. A level playing field was created and an enormous potential of creativity was set in motion. And today, every software startup can become a world champion. This would have been impossible with an exclusive IPR-based competition. It sounds paradox, but copyright law forms the legal basis to protect software as a commons. And if we come to seeds, seeds comply with seed laws, which do not protect seeds as a commons. And therefore, we from open source Seeds Agricole, we searched for an alternative and developed an open source seed license as a contract agreement under civil law. Due to its copyleft clause, the license protects seed and all its derivatives. And we consider the license an effective strategy to help building a commons-based seed sector, which provides seeds available for all and for any purpose, and which allows independent breeders to access germ plasma for plant breeding. We expect that seeds as commons can revive a small and medium plant breeding enterprise sector that during the past decades have increasingly disappeared. We need a great variety of plant breeders, creating diversity of crop species. This diversity is urgently needed to cope with the great challenges in agriculture, to adapt to climate change, to secure food security for an expected 11 billion people, and also to complete the transition from a chemical-based to an ecological-based agriculture. But instead of diversity, the IPR-based economies strive for uniformity in production. They lead to market concentration and monopolies. There we are. Monopolies stifle competition, reduce necessary innovation, raise the costs for seed, and make society increasingly dependent on a few corporations. My final conclusion is intellectual property rights and biodiversity are mutually exclusive, and I would really appreciate if we could discuss on this thesis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed as well. I'm sure we'll come back to many of those issues and the points to explore a little bit further. Heli, now I will give the floor to you from the European Patent Office's perspective. Tell me more.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's certainly a challenge to take the floor after Johannes, because I'm here now to talk about the patentability issues and the possibilities to protect innovation in this technical field. So the European Patent Office is to foster innovation, competitiveness and economic growth, and that by granting high-quality European patents. What we are talking about today in this conference and what we have heard from the previous speakers, we are certainly having here at least two interesting aspects focusing on the tasks of the European Patent Office, which both have also been mentioned in the Commission IP Action Plan. The topic is the question of plant patentability. The second question is certainly also the question of artificial intelligence and the digitization of all different economies, including agriculture, as we heard before. And certainly we are going to see there definitely also the combination of these both legal areas. For the European Patent Office, in its function to foster innovation, competitiveness, and economic growth in all technological areas, high importance is given to the stability of the practice and to transparency of the actions of the European Patent Office. When we look at the planned patentability area, so we received in May this year the opinion G319 from the Enlarged Board of Appeal, which gives further stability, transparency, and harmonization for the field of planned patenting in Europe. That opinion confirmed the practice of the European Patent Office since July 2017 that plant products obtained by essentially biological processes are excluded from patentability. Described our practice clearly in the guidelines for examination and even read from the guidelines for examination in 2021. Those guidelines will be published in February next year. Of course, what we have here now, since the opinion of the Enlarged Board of Appeal, is a very positive result, because now there is a harmonization effect between the practice of the European Patent Office and most of the contracting states, or actually in practice all of the contracting states, and also the legislation in many of our contracting states: Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, Portugal, and Romania, as who have similar provisions in their national legislations. In order to have valid patents issued and granted in that technology, to have clarity about the differences between patent protection and plant variety rights, we have been now for several years engaging in very intensive cooperation with the community, have included their data in our databases so that the searches for prior art can be as complete as possible. When it comes to the future digitization of agricultural innovation, so of course there as well we try to be leaders in distributing of the technologies in that area. I would like to apologize for any technical problems that have occurred during my opening statement, and would like to be then able to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Heli. We lost vision a little moment or two, but I think everyone was still able to hear you. I certainly was, so thank you very much for that. Denis, let me ask you, on a very broad scale, when we talk about open source and patent protection, aren't we really at heart talking about different business models? Now, given that the Commission has an overarching ambition for a greener future and a better situation for all Europeans, does it really have a position on which way that should be achieved?
Well, indeed, it is true, as you mentioned, sorry, that these are different business models, but they are very much complementary, and there is a place for both on the market. And we see that regarding software, or as they put them in the patent world, computer implemented inventions. Well, in that field as well, as for agriculture, as for all fields, in fact. When you have a new technology, when you have new piece of knowledge, well, there are different ways of looking at it from an IP point of view. You can place it in the public domain because you feel that is the right thing to do for the greater good of our world and humanity. or you can protect it by IP rights with the hope that it will promote innovation. And indeed, let's take, for example, if you consider publicly funded research, well, this is public money. In a way, it could be argued that all results of publicly funded research should be placed in public domain for everybody to access freely. But on the other hand, by doing so, first, in some sectors, if you have no IP protection at all, it may really discourage industries to place the products on the market. Because let's take the example of medicines, that is very typical. Further research, further development, clinical trials, etc., are needed before a research result coming from the lab can actually be placed on the market as a medicine. And for that, IP protection is needed for companies to be able to recover their investments. Well, this is valid in almost all sectors. And again, because I don't want to be too long, but I'll try to summarize. I mentioned it already in my opening statement. In our IP action plan, and maybe this is for the first time that, again, we do not place emphasis exclusively on the protection and enforcement of IP, but also on the sharing and access to IP, because there are many situations in which it is perfectly legitimate and necessary for users to be able to access under fair conditions. I did not say access for free, but to access some existing knowledge and technologies. And very final point, whenever we talk about IP, patenting in particular, of course, you cannot re-patent any technology, any knowledge that was already in the public domain before. So this, of course, is also applicable for seeds, for biotechnology, or any other inventions. What is in the public domain today can never be re-patented at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Jürgen, perhaps you could reflect on that, but I would also like to ask about speed in terms of achieving all these targets, these ambitious green targets that we have. Do you favor of a particular way of getting there at speed?
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, first of all, I want to echo some of the things that Denis said, which I think are spot on. You know, patent protection is not an instrument that hinders access to biological diversity. To the contrary, it's a legal tool that fosters investments for the creation of new biological diversity. Once the limited time of patent protection is over, for those having created this new genetic diversity, it becomes available to anyone. All innovators need a stable and predictable framework of IP protection that ensures legal clarity for both the innovator and the user of that innovation. And this particularly holds true in the field of agriculture and plant breeding, which has become very technical over time. New plant varieties are urgently needed to respond, for example, to the challenges of climate change. And speed is absolutely of essence here. And this requires innovation in this field to rely on significant investments, which are only possible with a predictable patent system providing legal protection. Obviously, I think these patents are super important, and because without them, I'm afraid that investments in the sector will go down, and we will not get to these innovative new plants that we need to feed a growing world population.
Thank you. Johannes, could I ask you to respond to that? Give us your reaction.
Yes. Well, there's no doubt that we need innovation. I mean, that's clear. But what kind of innovation do we need? And are IPRs the right way to finance innovation? I wonder, why does innovation have to be expensive? I mean, if I look at the logic of patents, it reads, I have to invest a lot in innovation development. Therefore, I have to protect my innovation with a patent. And patenting as such and defending the patent comes on top of the developing costs. As a consequence, innovations based on patents are more costly per se. Should we not ask, why do innovations have to be expensive? Why not provide and nurture a fair and level playing field for low-cost innovations based on exchange, voluntary contribution, networks, and a tough legal protection of commons? I mean, why does it have to be, why do we need these high costs for innovation development? If we have network economies, and I think you believe in network economies, we could have it much cheaper. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to have a look now at some questions coming in from our audience. And I have got one here that Heli is a very specific one directed at you, which is, can you comment on the upward distribution effect of income of patents? Heli, that one is for you. Heli, I think, oh, we've lost Heli again, unfortunately. In that case, let me turn to you, Alain. I wanted to ask, you know, in the area of IP, what is specifically different about the agricultural sector? What sort of separate issues must be considered within it?
IP
and you're on
not,
mute. Oh, yes, got you.
I'm not.
No, we've got you now. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Well, IP, I think, in general, is not focused on agriculture. We consider that the protection of geographical indication is the most rural IP rights, but we won't speak about GIs. It's an important topic in the field of agriculture, but let's discuss other issues. My view is that probably the IP system was not focused enough on the issues in certain sectors, including agriculture. And we have a system, the plant breeders' right, which is tailored to that sector. And I think it should remain a building blocks. The problem is that patent law has been taking more and more importance with the biotech developments, and now has more impact in the agriculture sector than the plant breeders' rights. My view is that the patent system is not fully tailored to some of the issues in agriculture as well as in other sectors. That's my problem. I think we should have more tailored IP rights, and patent is not always the best tool.
Thank you. I think, unfortunately, we're losing Heli again, so I will move on. Then we have a question came in. It's directed at Johannes and Jürgen. It's quite a challenging one, I think. It's, when small plant breeders can flourish with open source seeds, why can't Bayer? I think you might want to take that one first, Jürgen.
So why can't Bayer what flourish with?
With open source seeds.
Well, okay. So I think if we want to, again, going back to this Green Deal, if we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we need to get away from some of our today's chemical methods to more biological solutions, right? And these biological solutions are not available today to reduce the sustainability impact on our world. So we need innovation, and we need to work on new plant species, biological solutions, etc., to help us achieve these goals. And where is the investment going to come from if we can't protect the work that goes into all of this? It's not going to come from industry. It's also not even coming from academia anymore, right? Because even in academia, you know, this whole sharing of insights and building on each other's scientific achievements only works if you have patents. If you can't protect your work, you're not going to share it. But if you have protection of your work, then you can share it. Then you are happy to license your technology to everyone because you will know you have a share of the success through the license fees. So I think that true and tested system that we have since, you know, I'm not sure when we had the first patents, when we invented that system, but it goes through all industries, and I think it has served us very well, addressing, you know, bringing many great new technologies to the world, in agriculture, in healthcare, in technology, that have solved many of our problems. And I am confident that it would serve us well, continuing on this trajectory, and help and have innovation solve some of today's problems.
Thank you. Johannes, the same question there to you, which is, you know, whether or not big companies like Bayer could flourish with open source seeds. I mean, do you accept that there must be an investment for the sorts of innovation we want to see? And do you have an idea of whether that can or can't work at scale?
Yeah, I would like to respond to Jürgen. Of course, we need investment, but the example of the software movement, which I've presented in my introductory statement, shows that it can be quite different. I mean, the open source sector is flourishing, and considerable share is open source. And as to we need solutions. Of course, we need solutions. And we need not only biological solutions, we need comprehensive solutions, and these solutions require complex answers to complex problems. And if I look at the IPR-based innovations, they require a certain one-sidedness. It requires to focus on one or only very few traits, the ones which later on will be patented. And this is the compelling logic of patents. Their protection concerns one trait and not a complex system, including the social systems in which agriculture is embedded, which you cannot secure by a patent. So if we need complex solutions for complex challenges with manifold answers of the plant, for instance, to create resilience of cropping towards climate change. My question is, which evidence does exist that future innovations based on IPR would strengthen diversity and climate resilience? I did not find this evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. Well, perhaps one of our other panelists will be able to share some with you. But Alan, I think you wanted to come in on OSS and free seeds.
Yeah, I think the comparison is quite interesting. So open source software is obviously the model that the free seeds movement is following. It's an interesting one. I think it has led in the field of software to very important developments. And interestingly, as Jürgen stressed it, these open source movements relies on copyright. You need copyright and you need some types of license to have those software commons. So I think the same model could apply in agriculture and could apply to seeds, but it's not enough to solve the problems. And by the way, the IP system has not blocked the possibility of the free seed movements to develop. So it's not compatible with patent law, but it develops on the side of the patent-led system. I don't think that opening software source, for instance, is enough if you want to have very competitive markets. I don't agree with what Jürgen said when he said that open source software has helped us to avoid market concentration. You can have open source software and some form of market concentration. And we might refer, for instance, to Android of Google. It's an open source software, but it might be included in an approach that is quite closed and that helps a company to have a high dominant position on the market. So we should not oppose simply, in fact, the approach which is open and some market situation. You can have an open approach on certain resource, like software, like seeds, and that does not prevent some form of market monopolization on the side. I think the big issue, and I don't want to tackle here, is whether we can be satisfied with the industrial model in agriculture or not. I think the industrial model in agriculture is clearly linked to the patent model. And it has worked quite well, so we shouldn't be too negative. But this industrial system has as well some limits, and on certain issues, we might reach a limit. So it's important to develop alternative model as well. And that's why I'm very pleased with the free seeds model that should develop.
Thank you. Now, unfortunately, it looks like Hele is still just having terrible problems trying to get connected. And I did have a question here for her about what is the duration of patents on seeds. But perhaps, Denny, you could comment on the duration of patents in general in this sector, because, of course, I asked you again about speed, but we have the other side of that is, you know, if you want to drive innovation, you need those to be long enough lasting that there is an incentive.
Yes, well, in almost all countries of the world, the maximum duration of a patent is 20 years. That is very simple, so much shorter than copyright, for example. That is a maximum duration, which means that every year the owner of a patent has to pay renewal fees to the respective patent offices. And very often, by the way, patents are not kept in force for the full 20 years. If it appears that for whatever marketing reasons or technological reasons, a certain invention, a certain technology is no more relevant, of course, the patent holder will stop paying the renewal fees and the technology will fall in the public domain. And according to statistics, if I remember well, but maybe other speakers can comment, on average, the typical duration period during which a patent is kept in force is about 10 years. So, of course, for certain, it is the full 20 years. For others, it can be as short as 3-4 years. If, for example, it appears that the technology has some flaws that were unknown at the time of filing the patent application. And if I can, a very last detail, for some very specific categories of products, namely medicines and also plant protection products that are subject to a marketing authorization, so that is certainly a very limited category of products, it is possible under certain conditions, not in every case, to get what is called in Europe a supplementary protection certificate, which makes it possible in certain cases, again, not in all cases, to get an extra protection. So if you like, you can consider that as an extension of the patent, although it's technically a different IP right, with a duration of up to 5 additional years. Could be 6 months, could be 2 years, could be the full 5 years, and again, only in certain cases, not in all. But again, for normal situations, 20 years maximum.
It's a sort of related question. I think, Jürgen, you perhaps could answer. It's come in from Klaus Kostenhofer, who is asking, who has to bear the burden of proof if a genetic information has been pre-existing or is new and such available for patent? I sort of related to another question, which is from Henny, asking, when seeds are patented, what does this mean for the availability of natural seeds from the same plant? Jürgen, could you tell us a bit more about that and how it works and what the implications are?
Sure, with the disclaimer that I'm not a patent expert myself, but
sorry,
I'll
Jürgen,
try
you're
my
on
best.
mute.
Oh, am I really?
Oh yes, now I can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to take a stab at that with the disclaimer that I'm really personally not a patent expert, but I'll do my best. Maybe Heli can give more detail later on. First of all, I wanted to just add something that Denis said. The 20-year patent protection, really the clock starts when you file the patent, which is usually years before you have a product on the market, right? So the exclusivity that you enjoy in the market before it becomes public domain is usually much shorter, right? Just wanted to add that to Denis' statement. And now I guess, Jennifer, the question was around, help me again. Sorry, I'm blanking on what was the question.
The burden of proof when it comes to genetic material in determining whether it was pre-existing. Yeah, so
I think there are very clear rules about what is patentable and what not, right? And you know, again, I'm not an expert here, but I think it has to be sort of non-obvious. It has to be a real inventive step that is novel and that is non-obvious. That's sort of my mental model. So only if it falls into this category, you can actually patent it, right? So just a random finding somewhere is not patentable. That's maybe how I would address that question.
Thank you. Well, Heli, you seem to have a stable connection for now, so let me ask a couple of questions to you. Can you hear me, Heli? Give us a nod if you can hear me. No, I don't think so. Oh, well, unfortunately, I was going to ask Heli that same question there about genetic responsibility for determining genetic pre-existence. Denis, there is a new question here just for you. How do you prevent patent hoarding, knowing that patent genres disseminate over plants on their own?
Well, I'm not sure this is a question for me because this is really quite technical about maybe your colleague from Bayer who would be better placed to answer about that, because I don't feel this is too much of an IP question. But if I can come back very briefly to the question you asked to Heli, unless she's now available to comment, but it does not seem to be the case. No. So very briefly, how does it work for any technologies, whether genetic or plant-related or otherwise? In the first place, when you file a patent application, the relevant patent office will conduct a search into all existing material, can be previous patents, can be scientific journals, can be whatever kind of publications, to establish what is the so-called state of the art. And then it will compare your invention, the invention you claim in your patent application, with that state of the art. And indeed, as Jürgen has mentioned, the examiner will check if your invention is novel, is different from what is already known in the state of the art. And if so, it is not sufficient. It will also check if there is a so-called inventive step. That is to say, if your invention is obvious or not obvious compared to the state of the art. However, and then in a positive case, a patent will be granted, but then usually, and certainly for European patents, after a European patent is granted, there is a 9 months period during which anybody, any company, any individual, whatever, from any country in the world can file a so-called opposition. and can still argue, look, I have found a document that was not considered during the examination and that I think is detrimental to the patentability of that invention. And if this is considered relevant by the patent office, the patent can be revoked or limited in scope. So again, different possibilities to ensure that patents that are granted and that remain in force normally are really about patentable inventions. And last point, it can still be challenged in court. If you are accused of infringing my patent, then you can still argue in court that you have reasons, or very solid reasons, to argue that the patent is not valid. And if the court agrees, then of course you are not considered to infringe my patent.
Thank you, Denis, and thank you very much. I appreciate you answering a lot of those questions directed at Helle and stepping in there with that technical knowledge. But Jürgen, did you want to come back to this question now? It was from Adrian Labai, who had directed it at Denis, but was asking about patent trolls, and so has also asked, you know, how do you protect food from patent trolls, especially in the age of CRISPR that makes genetic modification so easy?
So again, you know, patents stimulate research, right? And innovation. And there are rules about what you can patent and what you cannot patent, but they not only stimulate innovation, they also stimulate collaboration. And I think that's just an important point that I wanted to reiterate, right? I think this biotech revolution that we are seeing, actually any sort of revolution that we are seeing, research in science-based industries, has been enabled by our patent system that we have today. And it's the notion that someone patents something and then protects it and then keeps it for himself is actually wrong, I think. To the contrary, if I have a patent, once I have the patent, I have all the interest to share my information, first of all, so that other researchers can build on my inventions, and that we create this huge worldwide research network that is really enabled through the patent system because it fosters sharing and interaction. And not only that, but if I have a patent, I actually have all economic interests to license my patent to others, right? And that can help build up whole new industries. I want to give you an example, right? Genentech in the 80s, I think, filed a patent on the methods how to manufacture antibodies, right? Now, Genentech themselves became a large antibody drug manufacturer and seller, but not only, right? They licensed their technology to every pharma company who wanted it, really, right? And that was really the source of a you know, 20, 30, 40, I don't know how many antibody drugs we have on the market today, but it's a huge market today that is not monopolized by Genentech, but they have really licensed this to any pharma company who wanted to use it for their own antibody drugs. So I just wanted to give that example to maybe illustrate why we don't think that patents are really a bad thing. Patents are really fostering innovation and collaboration across the world. So maybe that was not really answering the question, but I was trying to make that point.
Thank you. I mean, we do like concrete examples. Johannes, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, that would be great. I would just like to ask a question to Jürgen. I suppose you will agree that network economy is the future of development, in particular in times of digitalization. And this applies likewise to plant breeding. And my question is now, how can you conceive network economic models other than based on open source? I mean, you cannot work with network economic models with the IPR concept.
Okay, I think I'm going to give you a chance to think about a response to that question and come to Alan, because I think, Alan, you might maybe even worth explaining what we mean by patent trolls in the wider sense, not just with regard to agriculture.
Yeah, well, it's a pejorative name. There are more neutral names to refer to some entities which usually do not produce anything, and they are using their patent sometimes to force other companies to take a license. That's what is called basically patent trolls. I think the issue of patent trolls should not be inflated, but it's a real issue at the same time. At least it's an issue in certain fields, in the field of software, IT, and you might remember that around smartphones, there were patent wars a few years ago. It seems that now we have quite a lot of patent trolls in the fields of the automotive industry, because the car is becoming a connected vehicle, and you might have patents on different transmissions and connectivity system. I think it's a real issue, and we should not forget that patents allow, of course, to conclude contracts. It's a good way to collaborate. What Jürgen just said, I agree. At least when you have two companies that can be around the table because both have patents, and then they will conclude an agreement. It's maybe less easier when you are a very small guy in the market, but patent law is a very strong instrument when you litigate. And I'm a practitioner, so I know that when I have a patent, I can go in court, and it's quite a strong instrument because of the presumption of validity and the different tools that you can use. So we should be a little bit careful, and I am a bit afraid with one of the development that will come into future, and that is the Unified Patent Court agreement. It's very complicated. We shouldn't discuss that here, but it might reinforce the position of certain companies owning patent portfolio. And I don't know whether it will have an impact in the field of agriculture and seeds in particular, but it's a risk in other sectors.
Thank you. Jürgen, let me go to you. You have a couple of things to take on there. There's a question from Johannes, and perhaps you want to respond to Alan as well.
Yeah, happy to. So I think, Johannes, you asked about network economies, right? And I guess you are referring to network economies. I mostly hear about network economies when we talk about digital, right? So platforms like Google, Apple, etc., that sort of tie customers to their platforms, and particularly win because they have access to the data, right? I'm not sure that is really how we would take that experience to what is going on in science and research and agriculture, for that matter, right? So maybe you could rephrase your question so that I can answer more directly to what you are trying to get to when you raised the point of network economies.
Well, before we go to Johannes, I know Denis has a comment on this area as well. Denis.
Yes, I had a few ideas regarding the knowledge network economy. So I don't know if this is exactly what Johannes has in mind, but well, anyway, I'm going to make some short comments, and then he can and everybody can tell me if this is the right approach. We are very, and it was the word has been used by one of the speakers a few minutes ago. Open innovation. That is a prevailing paradigm now. So a new development model, research innovation model, in which a new technology, a new piece of knowledge is not developed exclusively by one company internally, etc., but is based on a number of inputs from other companies, can be from suppliers, from whatever. And indeed, today, most of the products, especially complex products that we have today, like mobile phones, etc., rely on a very high number of technologies, and not only from a patenting point of view, but if you look at a mobile phone, there is, of course, a number of technologies may be patented, but there are also the designs issues, there are the copyright issues regarding software, regarding ringtones, there are the trademark issues, of course. Well, many different IP rights may be involved. And I like the statement that was made long ago that IP rights are the currency of the knowledge economy. And indeed, by packaging certain technologies or commercial aspects, and again, copyright, etc., they facilitate transactions. They facilitate the licensing or the transfers of IP from one partner to the other, and the combination of different technologies or pieces of knowledge. And there are tools to simplify that management, for example, patent pools or IP pools more broadly. If you consider, for example, a technology that relies on standards, or standards that relies on a number of technologies, like for CD players, DVD players, or whatever, especially in the ICT sector. Usually, if you want to build, for example, a CD reader, you will need to get licenses on a high number of patents. Well, to facilitate that, some entities have set up patent pools. And if you want to make your CD player, you go there, you ask for a license on all of the relevant patents. And in one go, you will get that license. Of course, this simplifies very much the situation. So I understand the comment that in the network economy, this may seem to be difficult because there may be a number of IP rights applicable, hindering you from doing what you want to do in your sector, but there are also solutions. So our economy is becoming somewhat complex, that is true, but again, there are solutions and tools being developed to address and manage that complexity.
Thank you very much. Now, I think Helle has finally given up trying to connect there, but we do thank her for her perseverance, and we're glad at least we were able to get her opening comments. I'm going to go to a question now from Klaus Kostenhofer again, who has asked which disruptive technologies promise the biggest potential for contributing to solving climate and biodiversity crises. First, let me go, Alain, to you and ask you to define, if you like, what we mean by disruptive technologies in the first place. Do you have a clear concept of what that means, regardless of the sector?
That's a good question. Well, you are disruptive, I think, if you change the market developments. Usually it's not only a technology, but it's combined with a business model. And when you have both, then you might have companies that are really disruptive. And I think over the last 10, 15 years, the most disruptive companies were obviously the tech companies. So that's why I expect that with the digital transformation of agriculture, we might have disruptive technologies linked to the use of data, new platforms that might have a strong impact, and probably, at least hopefully, that will go into the direction of improving the greening of agriculture practices. But I not pick one technology, of course, and I'm not really an expert in agriculture technology. So that's not something I can do, and probably none of us can do that. But I see the digital transformation, including by Bayer, and maybe Jürgen can say more about Field View, which is an interesting tool that Bayer developed and is gathering different types of data, probably to help farmers to be more efficient and to have a more sustainable model.
Yes, thank you. Denis, you have a concrete example for us?
Yes, of course, it is not a recent example, but to clarify the ideas, and to be very short, because today most inventions have been about improving on pre-existing techniques. And one example where it was not about improvements is certainly the electric bulb. And once I read this statement, which is quite obvious, but very true, of course, is that it is not by improving the candle that the electric bulb was developed. So I think that is a very good example of a disruptive invention.
That I'll use that myself in the future, I think. Johannes, are you disruptive?
I don't know, because we are going back to traditions which have existed in the past. I mean, seeds have been bred, multiplied, shared, and developed further over thousands of years by farmers, and have yielded performing varieties. I don't want to say that modern plant breeding has not been very successful. It actually has. But I'm very much convinced that we need, as a next disruptive step, a change of business models. And I strongly believe in network economies, and this kind of disruptiveness, I think, would be a great leap forward.
Okay. Jürgen, let me hand the floor to you. Tell us about disruption and how it can be a tool for positive change.
Sure. Thank you. Well, that's obviously, the question that was asked here in the forum is obviously the big question, and millions of scientists and probably venture capital investors think they know what the real disruptive technology is, but history tells us that sometimes we are wrong. So I think we need many disruptive breakthrough technologies to help us solve some of the biggest problems that we are facing as mankind. So I guess in one sentence, our arable land is shrinking, our population is growing, and greenhouse gases are going through the roof, and our planet is suffering, right? So we have multifaceted problem that we need to solve. We need to produce more food on less land with less greenhouse gas emission, right? And many technological innovations will be required to cross that bridge. So maybe just to name a few. So I'm personally, for example, intrigued by vertical farming. If we are able to produce the food in our large mega cities around the world rather than in faraway fields, and we produce the food with like a fraction of the fresh water that would be required compared to open field farming. We would produce it with a fraction of the area, obviously, and water, as I said, required to produce the food, and we would have much fewer emissions. And we wouldn't have the transportation. We would have fresher produce with our nutritional value. So I think there is a lot of potential in vertical farming to at least solve or make a big leap forward. The other thing I already mentioned, I think, there is a lot of potential of getting away from chemical solutions to more biological, more natural solutions, but it requires investment and innovation, right? And I gave you one example at the beginning of this session called a company called Join Bio, a startup in Boston. Our IP and also our money to develop biological solutions to reduce the need for fertilizer. So there are many different fascinating technologies that are being developed, and I think taken all together, I think they could make a big change for the world and for us as mankind here to help overcome that big issue that we are facing with the shrinking arable land, growing population, etc. Yeah, so that's it. I think I tried to answer the question the best I could.
Thank you. I think you did, Alan. I think you have something to add as well on disruptive technologies.
Well, to add something, I think invention is only one ingredient to have this disruption. And there is probably a very long line in between an invention and a real disruption in the market. We should not forget that. So we should not focus only on the issues of invention and the possibility to get a patent protection for that invention. Because many companies might have patents, but then they cannot develop an innovative model, and for sure it cannot lead to disruption in the market. So disruption implies much more than patents, that's clear, and even much more than technology. And the example that Jürgen mentioned, which I'm not an expert on, vertical farming, seems to involve a lot of different practices and not one or two new technologies and a few patents around those technologies. No, it implies a new mode of organizing a lot of economic and maybe social relation, for instance, around certain localization. So if you localize agriculture, probably that will help a lot. So I think the solutions are in new practices, not only in new inventions or new technologies. That's the message I want to give. And it's much more complicated because to invent maybe it's not sometimes too complicated, but to put in place a new model for market relation and in addition always social relations is important and complicated.
Denis, let me come to you on this idea of a model. How important is that? I mean, do we always need to refer back to things like the Green Deal and so on when thinking about putting a model in place? Does it always have to come with an end goal, a target?
I think we need, in many situations, like to address these challenges, and certainly the Green Deal is about a very significant challenge that we are facing. We need political stimulus. We need a coherent way to go, agreed. It does not have to come from the top. It doesn't matter where it comes from, but there needs to be some agreement of some sense of urgency at a political level, whether it is at the level of the Commission, of the member states, or more internationally. And certainly in this case, there is these issues are, of course, being debated very heavily at the international level. If this is left to the forces of the market and to local initiatives, okay, of course, this may have some results, but this may lack some effectiveness due to a lack of alignment. So in many cases, whenever we see that very often, even whenever we are convinced at our level of desk officers that a certain reform is needed, etc., there is a need to escalate it at a political level, to argue for it. Of course, there is a need for a democratic debate. And then, okay, once a line has been defined, then hopefully this line is being shared, not only by policymakers, again, EU level, national level, but also by the so-called stakeholders, by the citizens, by industries, etc. And it is only when you have such a consensus that things can move in an effective manner.
Thank you. Johannes, let me turn to you and ask you about, with regard to sort of business models or working models and external consequences. I'm thinking in particular of this year, this COVID-19 pandemic, and how the focus has really switched to resilience. Do you think that models need to be suitably flexible, that they can change to react to circumstances, or is it better to have a framework that one sticks to?
Absolutely, we have to have flexible models, and that's why I think with these working in networks, in small groups, people cooperating together is much more flexible than a centralized system working for an innovation which is later on protected and of course financed by a patent. I think flexibility is, especially in these times now, is of utmost importance. Was this your question? I wasn't
Yes,
quite sure
thank you,
about.
indeed. Jürgen, let me put the same question to you, or the same, ask you to reflect on the same issues. I mean, has this current pandemic changed business? Has it changed how you view investing in startups? Have people become more risk averse, just in general, as well as with your experience?
Yeah, no, I think it has just underscored, I think, how well the system works today. I mean, if you look at what is happening with the COVID-19 vaccine, in less than a year, we have basically first patients or citizens being vaccinated, which is unheard of success of mankind. Really, billions of dollars have been invested in developing this vaccine, and I wouldn't have believed it at the beginning of the year that we would be this fast, right? And this is not despite patents, but this is because of patents. Patents really entice scientists to share their know-how and their inventions with each other so that others can build on that, right? And that's exactly what's happening across the world. If you look at just Nobel Prize laureates, it's very rare that a single person gets a Nobel Prize today, right? Why? Because people are working across the globe together on certain topics, but everybody, before he publishes his results, he patents what he has, sort of his work in progress, what he has achieved so far, and then they talk to each other, and then they build on each other's success. So I think the system works extremely well thanks to the patent system. And yeah, I think this system has served well, and I think it's going to serve us well in the future, helping us overcome some of the remaining open issues that we discussed earlier.
Thank you. Alain, did you want to add anything on this particular topic?
Well, I mean, on the flexibility, of course, it's very important. And I think IP rights should evolve, and sometimes should evolve more quickly. And that's why I fear that we might have a problem with patent law. Why? Because you might know that the rules concerning validity, they were adopted in 1960s, and we have the European Patent Convention of 1973, but discussed in the 1960s. Technology, practice, markets have evolved a lot since then. And the problem is that on the other side, we have a new instrument. I come back on the UPCA, Unified Patent Court Agreement, which is an international agreement. You maybe ignore that the substantive patent provision in Europe, they are partly in the European Patent Convention, which is outside the EU. And now we will have additional provisions, all the substantive patent provisions concerning the scope of protections, the exceptions, they will be out of reach of the EU because they will be, when the UPCA will come into force, into an instrument of international law. It sounds very complicated what I'm explaining here, but the message is we will have some difficulties in amending patent law in the EU because part of the patent law is in the UPC of 1973, and in the future it will be in another international instrument, which means that the EU has no say. We won't be able, for instance, to give an example, to introduce a special exception if it's needed, I don't know, concerning seeds or agriculture, because the exceptions are in an international instrument. And I think people do not realize that problem, which raise real democratic issues. That's why with some colleagues, we are still against the entry into force of the UPCA, because it has the effect that patent law will escape the possibility of EU institutions to change patent law, and patent will be outside the supervision of the Court of Justice of the EU. That's what the UK wanted, because they pushed for this solution to take the patent provision outside of EU law. You know, they didn't like very much the supervision by the Court of Justice of the EU. That's why they did it. The other countries accepted that solution. I don't think it's a good solution. So here we will have a problem if we want patent law to evolve, and it's important to remain flexible and to make it evolving with the new technologies.
Thank you very much for that, Alain. We have just a few minutes now to go, so I'm going to come to each of you for closing statements, your chance to sort of sum up how you've seen the debate and to answer our overarching questions about providing the best model to ensure the best future for Europe. Denis, I will come to you first, and perhaps you can even comment a little bit further on the IP action plan that you mentioned right at the very beginning as well.
Yes, indeed. And indeed, what I was going to mention as a sort of conclusion is very much in line with what I said initially already about this IP action plan. In which, by the way, we still support also the unitary patent. And okay, this is maybe not the place and time to debate about that with Alain, but we are aware of some of the difficulties, but there is always these provisions, these existing provisions that ensure that any EU law can be reflected directly into both the European Patent Convention and the UPC agreement. But okay, that's for another debate. Coming back to today's topic, indeed, there are two, but that is valid, what I'm going to say, that is valid for almost all technological fields, including software and many others. There is room for two models. On the one hand, the open source, or let's say public domain approach, and which, by the way, is also loosely connected to this concept of frugal innovation that we see emerging in many developing or emerging countries like India. So this is simply the idea of coming back to very simple technologies, not high-tech, sort of low-tech, well-adapted, well-suited to the needs and capacities of certain countries or regions, and not relying on IP protection. That is a very valid model for those who want to embrace it. That is not a problem. We are not IP maximalists. We do not see IP policy, IP protection as an end in itself. And again, there are many cases, like also for fundamental research, where it is totally appropriate to place new knowledge in the public domain without any IP protection. However, at the same time, there are also many situations in which the traditional IP approach, so protecting any new results and technologies by IP rights, makes sense, because again, it provides incentives for innovation and also, we must say, revenues to companies investing in research. By the way, we see also that even in the public sector, universities, public research center, etc., although you could think, oh, they are working primarily for the interest of the public without any commercial intention. And of course, I do not encourage them to take a commercial approach, but we see it's simply a fact that they are more and more investing in IP protection, licensing, etc., because this is giving them additional revenues in some cases, if positive, and this is also giving them, this is also promoting in many cases the exploitation of any results they have developed, so as to generate socio-economic benefits.
Thank you, Denis. Alain, your final thoughts?
Well, maybe I'll come back with what Johannes said. I think it was a little bit strong when he said IP rights and biodiversity are incompatible. I don't agree with that. I'm not always, in favor of IP, but I don't think we should say that it's incompatible with biodiversity. It all depends on how IP rights are practiced. So it's more to management, the way IP rights are used in practice that is decisive. And there, I think there is some flexibility in the IP system. It has allowed open models to develop. And the example mentioned by Johannes is obviously the open source software development, which was allowed by IP, by copyright. So the message is, I don't think it's incompatible. It depends on how you practice your IP rights, and some IP rights can clearly be used in practice to favor diversity in, for instance, software sector, and we have a very vibrant software ecosystem combining open and proprietary software. We might have the same, I think, in other sectors. IP rights are not blocking diverse practices. That's a message, maybe, at the end.
Thank you, Alain. Johannes, a few final words from you?
Thank you. I mean, I agree, the world is not black and white. We may need both. We need IP and we need open source, but the IP world is over-dominating our life and our economies, and this is dangerous. And with respect to agricultural seeds, innovation development, which is primarily based on intellectual property rights, is a dead end, in my opinion. Whereas open source stimulates creativity, offers fascinating opportunities and robust results. And we would advise, or I would advise the private sector for its own benefit to take up open source strategies, to take them on board. And we hope for a law to protect seeds as commons. I mean, copyright law is a law that protects software as commons. Isn't that great? We don't have such a law for seeds, but we urgently need it. We need a commons-based seed sector as a second pillar to the private seed sector governed by IPRs. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, last but not least, Jürgen, you have the final word to wrap up.
Thank you. Well, you know, Bayer's purpose is science for a better life, right? And our mission is health for all and hunger for none. As such, we are big believers in innovation to help us solve some of the biggest challenges in this world. We are also strong believers in open innovation and collaboration across boundaries. And we do so on a daily basis, on a constant basis, really. But in order to facilitate that collaboration, we do need a stable and predictable framework of IP protection that gives us legal clarity, both for the innovators, but also for the users of that innovation. Within that framework, we are happy to collaborate, to license our technology, which we do in many cases, and that includes seeds, you know. And we must not forget that not all seeds are patented, right? Only true innovative seeds can actually get a patent, and so it's not that this world, the seeds world, is completely locked up.
Thank you very much, Jürgen, and indeed thank you to all our panelists today, to Helle, Johannes, Alain, Jürgen and Denis. And I want to thank Bayer for supporting our debate today. Do follow along using the hashtag EA Debates to see future Euractiv virtual conferences. And thank you once again to all our audience. I hope we got to as many of your questions as possible in the time allowed. So do stay with us. I'm sure this conversation is not over, and one we will be having online for quite some months to come. Thank you and have a great day.